Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this video. Welcome to another Sunday Nights with Endangered story. This is when we like to show more longer cuts of interviews that we do. Some are new and some we are kind of not repurposing, but we're showing you the full interview so that you can get the proper context of what the interviewee is talking about, as opposed to just small little clips. So in this one, we're going to show you Bernice. Bernice, I met at a presentation that I was doing. She approached me and she said that she's been living in Beaconsfield since the 20s?
Her dad bought the property, built the house in 23.
2 years ago, 22.
In 22,
so 88, well, 80 minus 1924, so 19, that's 1940. She's born in 37 or something like that. 36.
She's been living in the house since 1937.
So I met Bernice at a presentation that I was doing 2 years ago, and she said that her father actually bought property in Beaconsfield in the 20s. I hadn't touched anything at that point outside of Point Claire. This was going to be my first venture into Beaconsfield, although I did do a bow repair one, I think. Anyways, so she agreed to do an interview, and indeed we did do about a 1 hour long interview. We've released some clips, as I said before, but never the full thing. This is a good chunk of it. And again, we wanted to revisit Bernice because she is adorable. She's just adorable, and she's had the best time growing up in Beaconsfield since the 30s, and it's incredible to find a connection to someone who bought a property in Beaconsfield in the 1920s. Not that close to the lakeshore, I may add. Quite far from the lakeshore, which is interesting in itself. So before we start, please like the video. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to the channel so that you can get notified when this happens. And like I said, like the video, because then that tells YouTube that people like these videos, so they'll suggest these videos to people other than you guys. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Bernice Barry's interview with me, Jason. Thank you for having me in your home. This is really generous and very nice of you.
I was looking forward to it.
To do this, I was excited that when you finally when you came up to talk to me, and then I heard you mention a couple things. The first thing I thought was, I have to interview her.
My name is Bernice Barry. I've been in this house all my life. That's 85 years. Now, my father bought the property in 1921, built a summer cottage in 1923. They didn't own a place in the city. They came out here in the summer and rented in town in the winter. But during the Depression, they decided, instead of paying taxes here and rent there, that he would winterize the house, which they did in the 30s. And then when that was, well, it wasn't finished, but it was livable, and they came out and lived permanently in the 30s, in the late 30s. And I've been here ever since. So I've been here all my life. It's 85 years.
Where were they living before? You said they were renting in the city and then summers here.
Yeah, well, in the city, in those days, you could rent and move any time of the year. So every time they went back in, they usually rented a different place. Not always, but I guess if they rented and came out in the summer, I guess the owner probably rented to somebody else. I don't know.
What did your father do for a living to give him this kind of flexibility to move around all the time?
He worked for CN in the railroad yards as a yardman. He was a real outdoors man, like myself. I always gravitated to the outdoors. And he sort of taught us to enjoy the outdoors. That's why he bought this property out here. And there were only 9 houses on the street. Was very different from what it looks like today.
This sort of seems central. You're the first person who I've interviewed where their father decided to move quite inland. Why do you think he wanted to move so? Was it on purpose? He wanted to be far away from?
No, this was the first farm that was sold. All the others were farms. And so it was the first farm that was sold, and he had trouble selling it, so he was almost giving it away. I think he paid $350 for it. And because they couldn't get anyone to move here, to live, to buy here. And there were just a few of us that did. And he was one of them. Well, the way he got news of it was there was a couple down the street, and they had a summer cottage over in Maple Grove. I don't know if you know where that is. And my father's sister, his eldest sister, she and her husband had a cottage there, and they used to go over there on Sundays. And then he met this couple that used to live down the street, and he told them about this place. Properties were for sale, and so he came up and looked at it and bought this one. And
So I'm guessing at the time, this would have been one of the main roads that went.
The only road
that went in between the farms. The next one would be, I guess, St. Charles.
there was just on the north side of the highway of the tracks. It was Sources, St. John's, St. Charles, and this little dirt road that we're on, which was called, at that time it was called Beaconsfield Court, and they changed the name to Westcroft Road.
So at that time, do you remember growing up that things seemed further away?
Oh, of course, everything was far away. We had a milkman that came and a baker. But for groceries, because we didn't have a car, nobody had a car, and we didn't have a phone. When we first moved here, we didn't have a phone. So my mother would make a list of groceries, of food, and give it to my father, and he would take it to work with him, and on the way, when he was finished work, he'd pick up the groceries in, I think it was St. Henry, grocery stores in St. Henry, and arrange to have them to deliver it out here. That's what it.
You can't even get a pizza if it's
Oh.
a few streets away now. They delivered from St. Henry to here.
Well, it was a personal delivery, you know, yeah. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't something they did all the time. They did it sort of for us, you know.
So your father, so no phone and no car, and so your father would have gotten off at which train station?
Beaconsfield,
And then
walked home.
have
We
you,
are.
have you ever done that walk?
Oh, but we did it all the time. That's how we went to school. We walked down to the train station. The bus was there. The bus wasn't allowed to come across the tracks, the railroad tracks. So we had to walk down to the train station and got the bus there. And went up to Beaurepaire School. Yeah. Yeah, well, when they came out in the summer, my father had a car then, because there were only two, they only had two children then. But then, I guess it was during the Depression, later in the Depression. No, he must have had it longer than that, because they didn't come out by train, I'm sure of that. But I know my sister remembers them, when they came out in the summer, she remembers them lighting the gas lamps.
Which ones?
Pardon me? In the house. We had gas lamps.
Oh, in the house.
Yeah. But I remember them lighting the gas lamps on the train.
Wow. You had a gas line coming into the house?
Oh, not then. You had nothing. You had, I don't know when they put in the hydro. The farms were our playground. We went everywhere, and it was wonderful. We had a wonderful childhood, yeah. very fortunate. And the farmers were so nice and, accommodating.
So these are the old French farmers.
The old French farmers, they couldn't hardly speak English. We couldn't speak French, but we managed, We would follow him around in his hay wagon, and then he'd let us get up on the top and bring us back to the barn. And we'd watch him milk the cows, and it was wonderful. It was. And then in the spring, we would be out playing. You'd see the smoke coming up from either the woods over there or the woods over here, and you knew that they were starting their maple syrup. So then we'd go over and watch that. They'd go around with their horse and wagon and pick up the syrup from the trees.
And this is why this is so interesting. You saw the final transition from this whole section of the island going from farming community that it had been for at least a few hundred years at that point to suburbia. Mm-hmm. So explain to me a bit more, because you said that this was the first farm. Your father found out about it because it was the first farm that was being sold in the area. That's why your house is located where it is.
Yeah.
Now, was that farm, because those farms were massive?
Well, they weren't that wide. I'm sure you realize this. You knew this, but they were long, eh? Mm-hmm.
But when you said this farm, the farmhouse would have been.
Oh, the farm. They were all on St. Charles Road, and this one came back. Now, there were farms over there that came up from. They must have come up from the lakeshore. Across the tracks, yeah, because they used to have cattle crossings on the track. And as a matter of fact, they had one at the end of our street that the farmer used, I guess, to come up here. And then I remember the story goes, my father telling us that there was a family down the street, a couple down the street. The house is still there, an old house that he built, lovely house that they ruined by renovating it. But anyway, and he had a cow named Bessie, and Bessie got loose and went down and across the cattle crossing, across the railroad tracks, and got hit by a CP train and was killed. So he sued the CP, and so they closed the cattle crossing. That was the story, yeah.
Wow. So when I'm looking at your plot of land here, the farmer who sold, this would have been the end of his farm, because the house would have been on St. Charles going back to.
It went back to the back of our property. His farm went to the back of our property, because that's Kirkland, the back of our property.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, the back line of our property is Kirkland.
Do you think it's a coincidence, or why do you think it was the English who were coming to buy all these and develop all these homes?
It was Anglophone on the West Island, except for Point Claire and I guess Dorval. But originally, all those farms were Francophone, were owned by Francophones. And it was the English, I guess, that bought them. Well, the Francophones then were suppressed, weren't they?
Because the Anglophones, I guess, had the jobs that were
enough
money to have this type of, I guess, what would have been luxurious lifestyle.
Was, yeah, except for us. Yeah.
So what years did it start to really...
Well,
a little bit here?
I think the first houses that were considered to be, we thought they were very luxurious. They're just down the street. They don't seem luxurious now. And that would have been in the early 60s.
So explain the landscape a little bit to me. You said you would just run into the farm fields and.
Yeah, just over the fence, over the back fence. Mainly that field, that farm, I mean. And and the cows were there, and there was he would alternate. Usually 1 year was pasture and the next year was grain, usually. But when the cows came, there was one cow in particular, like all animals, they can be very friendly. And this one cow used to come to the fence, and we would pat its nose and pat the cow and feed it grass, which was right in front of it. It didn't need to be fed, but it used to come to the fence all the time. And when we would see it, we'd go out, and we used to give it like if we had corn on the cob, we would give it the finished cob. And I don't know what it did to the milk, but anyway, there was no corn on it. But anyway, and this cow, sometimes she would come to the fence and then she'd start mooing, so we would go out and pat her and feed her and everything. I remember one morning my mother was doing my hair, braiding my hair, and there was, we called her Dribbly because she used to dribble. And my mother was saying, well, this Dribbly's calling you, so you go out and feed Dribbly, yeah.
You're talking about what era now? Decade, years?
Oh, in the 40s.
So a lot of this is about your childhood, but what about when you started to become a teenager? And did you have the urge to venture out?
Oh, yes. Then when we had we wanted a bicycle badly. My older sister had a bicycle. Now, I think they must have gotten that just before the war, or just as the war started or something. But then we wanted one. She would give us a ride on hers. But anyway, we wanted one, but we couldn't have one because of the war. All the material for the bicycles were used for the war, for the, material in making all the artillery is the word I'm looking for, yeah. And then when we finally got one, every year we'd ask, I can remember asking for a bicycle. We were like, you have to wait till the war is over. Of course, the war went on for 5-6 years, right? And so finally the war was over, and I guess it was 2 or 3 years after, maybe 3 years after, I can remember coming home from school. In those days they had Eaton's and Simpson's catalog, and my parents had ordered a bicycle through the catalog for my sister and I. And we came home from school, and my brother was walking ahead of us so fast. And anyway, he got home first to tell my mother that we're coming up the road to be prepared. So they stood at the front door window to see us coming in, because we had a porch then like this. And the bicycles were put on the porch. And of course, when we opened the door and saw these bicycles, oh my God, it was one of the happiest days of my life. We were so excited. It was just wonderful.
Now, what would the bicycle have given you in terms of freedom?
Well, then we could ride our bicycles down. We could down to Point Claire Village. Now, Point Claire Village was our hangout. We did everything. They had a baseball team there. They had a movie house there, a movie theater there. And they had a little, what did you call it in those days? A little, they had a name for those little stores. They had a couple of little booths, 2 or 3 booths, and some stools at the counter, And they sold hot dogs and hamburgers, and they sold soft drinks and things. And after the baseball game or that, everyone would go to the, do you know in Point Claire where the floral shop is, the Westmount Floral? That's where it was. It was in there. We had a chip wagon in Point Claire Village. The best chips, French fries you could ever get. Oh, they were good. And we would always get it before we went to the baseball game. Yeah.
Huh. So Point Claire Village, now Beaurepaire Village didn't have, was it too far for you? Or there wasn't
I don't know why. We only went to school there. I can only remember, at the end of, on the Lakeshore Road, and St. Louis Avenue, there was a little store, and I guess they got groceries there. We used to go down there at lunch hour and get candy for a nickel. And it was called Kenny's. But prior to Kenny's, it was called Passchendaele from the First World War. And then I guess whoever owned it sold it to this family called Kenny's.
So biking down to the village. Now, when you're going to I know the village also hosted some dances. They would have some dances.
I don't know about, I don't remember anything in the village, but I know in Kirkwood, do you know Kirkwood Avenue? It's just, I guess it was St. Charles, and then there was Kirkwood, and after that it was farms to the village, as far as the village started. And Kirkwood, well, I would have been in my teens, my late teens, I guess, then. At the end of Kirkwood Avenue on Lakeshore Road, there's a little crescent there, and they would hold dances there. It wasn't that often. I don't think it was every week, but they would hold street dances, they were called. Yeah, and occasionally we'd go down there. Yeah, but so that was just the only thing I know about anything out of here. But of course, as we got older, you know, when I was in my teens, we had our bicycles. We could venture anywhere, everywhere and anywhere. In those days, but your bicycle had to have a light in the front, a light in the back, had to have a license. Very important to have a license. And you had to have a bell. Oh, yeah. And they were made of metal. I don't know whether it was steel or what, but they were so heavy because they were 28-inch wheels. They were big bikes. And we used to take them down. We used to swim down at the lake down here. And we used to take our bicycle by bicycle, and we'd go down to the end of the street here and pull them up a bank over the railroad tracks. And between the railroad track, the CN and the CP, it's a very deep ditch. And it was so deep, they had a path that went in an S. And we used to put our bicycles, and we were only about, well, as I say, I was about 9 years old when I got my bike, 9 or 10. And we had these big heavy bicycles down that path, around the S, push them up the other side. And I don't know how I did it.
Wait a minute. So I thought that you were a teenager. You mean to say that when you used to go to baseball and the movie...
That was when we were teenagers. Yeah, that was when we were teenagers.
Okay.
That wasn't until, we got older. But when we were young, when we were, just after we got our bikes, we used them to go down to the lake to swim. And that was, and on the way home, you'd stop and pick raspberries. And there was, where the high school is now, on Beaconsfield Court, was a pump that the farmers used to get their water. And there was a pail or something on the side, and you had to make sure if you're going to use the pump, you had to prime it with that water. So once you got your water, you had to remember to keep water to fill that pail for the next person to come along, so that he can get water. You know, he can pour that water from that pail into the pump, prime the pump, and the water would come out.
What is that priming to create the pressure?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. This would have been just after the war, because the immigrants were here, and a lot of them worked on the railway, and there was a siding down here, and they would, they had their cars, their box cars, on the siding, and that's where they lived. And they used to get their water from that pump at the station. And I can remember them carrying, it had like a yoke across their shoulders and a pail on each end of this thing. And they would fill their pails with the water from that pump and carry it up to their boxcars. Because they slept there, they had a kitchen there, a cook and a kitchen, and yeah.
These were the people who worked on the railroad?
Well, they were mainly immigrants. You know, they'd come over after the war, and they got jobs in the railway. One story, we had you ever heard of Jack Rabbit, the skier? Okay. His daughter used to just live down here, down the street, and she was a wonderful person. Oh my God. She loved children, you know, and there was just, as I say, us four, and I think there was another young boy that lived beside her. And she was a geologist, and I think maybe an entomologist, I'm not sure. But she used to take us on these field trips. And she was so interesting. She'd take us over here where we used to pick our trilliums, over where Windermere School is. And she would take us, and she would turn over a stone and explain out what's underneath and what kind of a stone it was and all the insects underneath. And we used to have the field right behind us. Just at the end of that field, there was a pond. And at the pond at this end and at that end were trees. And in the winter, that pond would freeze, and we would skate on that pond and walk from the house over to the pond through the farmer's field in the snow with our skates on. And we'd skate in that pond, and then you could skate around the trees. It was really neat. And so she came one day, she decided we'd have a skating party. So she came out with an old, what did you call those old gramophones that you wound up, eh? And she had some records that were very old of the skaters, of all Viennese music, okay? So she brought those records out, she put them on the gramophone, she's winding it up and winding it up. And she's skating around. She even had a lovely dress on, a lovely skirt on, and she had cut down some bulrushes and put them over and lit them. And now this is at night, and she lights the bulrushes, and we're skating around. But then it was so cold that the needle wouldn't go around the record player. So anyway, we got a little bit of music out of it, and but she was just so wonderful. Over there, also was farms. I don't remember them. In my time, they weren't used as farms, and there was one place that was used, and it was where Windermere School is. That farm was still being used because they used to tap their maple trees there. And then beyond that was another area. It was all cedar trees. It was a forest of cedar trees. It was beautiful. And there was a creek that went through it. She used to take us over there and show us in this pond. It would be all flooded, and she'd show us all the little pollywogs and all the little things that were swimming around in there. Show us all kinds of stuff like that. And one year, my brother and his friend, Walter, had the bright idea that they would make a raft out of the railroad ties that were on the side. You know, they'd change the railroad ties when they wore it. So they collected these railroad ties, made this raft, and they were so proud of going up and down this creek, and they wanted us to go over and take a ride on their raft. But we were forbidden to go over there. We weren't allowed to go near that creek. Anyway, in case we fell in. So they enticed us to go over there, and we got on their raft, and there was my brother and Walter, and I think Eileen and Loretta, I think, were on there. And then Betty and I were to step, so that would have been 6 of us. And Betty and I went to step on the edge of the raft, and of course it sunk. And we went up to our waists, and we were lucky because that was a deep ditch. And we were near the edge. We went up to our waists in water and come home, and we had to walk through a plowed farmer's field, and it was all mud. Anyway, we came home, and I can remember trying to hide my clothes that were all wet, but my mother did find them.
So you always stayed here. Did you move and come back? Or?
Oh, never. Only in the summer. I was born in 1937, and they, I think, moved out here just then, around 1937, 1938, permanently, yeah. But the house wasn't even finished, eh? I mean, it was winterized. He had to get it was on posts. He had to get a foundation put in. So he did that. And then he had to, he had it insulated, partially. It wasn't that well insulated. And, but there were no drywalls up at all. Like he had it stuccoed. And then, I don't know, the 2x4s, but the tongue and groove all the way along. And I can remember the weather was much colder then, in January, seeing the nails coming through, and the ends of the nails would be frosted. They'd be white. And it was cold. But I don't know, as kids, you're playing and everything. I don't remember being cold. But it must have been darn cold especially for my mother, and yeah. It was.
And your mother, she enjoyed the country lifestyle?
No. She was a city person, but she lived in, I guess, Point St. Charles, in the corner of Mullen and Wellington Street, and I believe that house is still there. It was 4 or 5 years ago. Anyway, she came out because she realized, it was the most economical thing to do. When they were renting, they were paying taxes, so she realized, it's winterize the house and move out here. But he built the house himself, so he had to do it when he came home from work, and he worked really hard. I mean, as I say, he worked in the yards, and in the winter especially. And then he would walk up from the train station, and have dinner and work on the house.
So, what kind of house were you sitting and eating dinner in when it's not complete? What parts were not complete yet that he was?
Everything was complete. It's just that the inside wasn't finished. Like he had, all the walls were up. Everything like this was all up, but and we had the dining room. We had a dining. I mean, all this furniture is old. I mean, they bought this when they got married in 1926. So all this is.
This is what I'm sitting on?
Yeah.
This is from the
1926. It's been reupholstered several times.
Okay.
And the dining room set's the same thing now, 1926.
Wow.
So, as I say, everything around here is old. He worked along the canal bank. The railroad tracks the yards were along the canal bank, because that's where all the industry was, right? Uh-huh. And they used to build, I don't know what, but they used to make nails, and they would have discards that they would throw out in the backyard or something. My father would go back there and collect all these nails, because it was during the war. You couldn't get things like nails, and so he'd collect these nails and wrap them up in craft paper, I remember, put string around it and carry them home. Carry all those heavy nails over from the station. Oh my God, and that man worked so hard. And that's what he used to build the house. I just remember going to bed at night and listening to the sawing back and forth. Nothing was mechanized, eh? It was all hand and hammering. Yeah.
Wow.
Poor man.
When did